And not only will he not allow her to take a receipt, he actually lies about this. He lies about the fact that Grijalva can carry out business, she can talk to constituents, she can deal with their matters. She can't. She is barred from doing any business as a representative till she is sworn in. And Johnson knows that. So as usual, he looks like he's cleaning up after Donald Trump's mess. And Donald Trump's mess here is the Epstein files. Let's be very clear about it.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Professor Scott Lucas from the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin on the show. And just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcast. Scott, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me here, Maddie. It's great to be back.
Good to have you back on the show. We're going to kickstart with the big news in the United States, which is very New York-centric, but it's making national and international news actually this week, which is of course Zohrah Mamdani, a Democrat socialist who won the New York mayor's race, a 34-year-old Muslim. It's a big win for the Democratic Party after what has been quite a stale year for the party ever since Joe Biden's disastrous debate, I would say, which was, I think, last June. So winning the seat for New York in a liberal state is one thing, but do you think the Democrats can, I guess, translate this record turnout and this movement to other states?
That's the huge question, Maddie, but it's not just in New York. I'm going to go just a bit wider here and we can talk about Zohrah Mamdani. I think he may be a generational politician in terms of shifting American politics. It may be those around him that are shifting American politics. We can talk about just how young people were just simply mobilized in New York when they were supposedly apathetic and beat down. We can talk about his policies for sure, which I think are significant, but it's beyond Zohrah Mamdani because there were other elections this week that could be even more significant. And that I'm specifically looking at the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. You had two experienced Democratic candidates. In New Jersey, it was Mikey Sherrill. In Virginia, it was Representative Abigail Spanberger. And they not only won handily over Trumpist opponents, they won very big. Spanberger won by 15% over the lieutenant governor, Winsome Sears, and Mikey Sherrill won by 12% over a Trumpist businessman. And the reason why I go to those, before we go back to Mamdani, is that was an example of politicians who haven't gotten the limelight as much as Mamdani, who would not be seen quite as out there in terms of the progressive policies of Mamdani, but who ran very much on pragmatism and competence. Indeed, Spanberger, in her acceptance speech, said, pragmatism rather than partisanship, competence rather than chaos. But at the same time, both of those candidates ran on the idea that America can be better. And it's a contrast, it's a positive politics versus the Trump politics of confrontation. And Mikey Sherrill closed her speech, whereas Mamdani had all these young people that were galvanizing the campaign. Mikey Sherrill went back to someone who's 76 years old, but who happens to be a native son of New Jersey, a guy named Bruce Springsteen, and said, quoted the boss. As the boss said, roll your sleeves up, let's get to work. This country we love, let's make it great again. And like the room just erupts. And what I think you've got when you put Mamdani together with those contests, and we could point to other individual local initiatives on gun control, on support of food aid that won this week, you're talking about what we could call that big tent politics. That it's not just simply Democrats just simply going to economic issues and running the center lane, which is what a lot of folks had been yelling for and saying, forget the cultural issues, forget about civil rights. It's not just simply, on the other hand, going to that notion of, cultural rights, LGBT, women's rights. You can do both at the same time. You can realize that people are hurting economically. You can deal with those economic issues. And you can also talk about the fact that you need a better America. You need a decent, tolerant America rather than that America of Trump, which is us versus them.
Because there was so much last year about identity politics from the Democratic Party, Scott. I don't know if we spoke at the time, but that's kind of really where they lost a lot of voters, because voters do care about the economy. So this is a stark contrast. But I just want to move on to the fact that what are your thoughts that some people would argue that there just really wasn't enough competition in New York? I mean, we saw the main rival for Mamdani was, of course, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who ran, he only resigned in 2021 after a pretty disastrous exit, Scott. And just for our viewers and audience to really understand, because they covered this at the time, he had to resign in 2021 because he was accused of sexual harassment by 11 staff members. His government undercounted or falsified COVID numbers. He was prioritizing COVID testing in those early stages for his own family. I remember at one stage he let COVID positive patients in nursing homes return from hospital back into the nursing homes, in turn obviously infecting more nursing home patients. So he really left on a bad note. So I wonder if New Yorkers were looking at that, think, I'm not bringing him back into a political position.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Just before I get to it real quick, man, I just want to extend on one thing, which is I think you make a really interesting point about how the Democrats appeared to be down because they were seen as doing identity politics in 2024. I think there's a reframing that's coming out here, which is, look, when you talk about the necessity for women to have rights, and you've mentioned, by the way, that came up in the New York City election, given Andrew Cuomo's record, that's not just identity politics. That's not just women's identity. That's the rights that women women's rights are human rights. When you talk about transgender, transgender rights are human rights. Now, I agree that, there were some, and they're always, we know them out of all movements that can take it a bit too far in terms of the caricatures and so on. But that's not what most people are talking about. And I think the Democrats, one thing to look for is whether they've put that destructive label off to the side. It's become a politicized label, and really gotten to the fact of we're talking about civil rights here. In terms of New York, I want to link that to something which I think is equally significant, which is that you're seeing a generational change which is taking place within the Democratic Party. I'll talk about Cuomo specifically in a minute because we're not going to let him off the hook. But, you're talking about that already the Clintons are gone. Hillary's not going to come back into frontline politics. Joe Biden, gone. Now you get Andrew Cuomo, the son of an iconic New York governor, Mario Cuomo, a person whose whole career was marked out not only to follow his dad, but possibly to go beyond him. He's now gone. Zohrah Mamdani, cheeky little fella, when he said, I wish him well with his return to private life, right? Because what was not elevated as an issue, and I think that's in part because the Mamdani campaign wanted to focus on that positive politics agenda, was, look, if you're going to try to take on Mamdani, on his policies, on the energy, Andrew Cuomo, who lost to him in June, despite the fact he was ahead in the polls in the primary, who then says, I'm going to rebrand myself as an independent. This is an independent who is accused of sexual harassment by many women, right? This was something that we hammered Donald Trump for years and continue to hammer him for, quite rightly. Andrew Cuomo should not get off the hook for this. He was someone who, in his own way, having mismanaged COVID, we could talk about the nursing home affair in New York. A lot of people look at it and say, oh, but he's pocketed, what was it, $5 million that he's pocketed to write a memoir about it? So this looked like, in its own way, a man of privilege, a man who almost thought, high office is my right to have whatever I've done. And remember, it wasn't just Cuomo. Remember that Mamdani also defeated in the primary the current New York City mayor, a guy named Eric Adams, who's a guy on the hook, or would have been on the hook, for corruption charges had he not been pardoned by Donald Trump, right? And it's like, look, seriously, you want to take on Mamdani? If you want to take him on the policies, you don't think free child care is where you go? You don't think you want to go with rent controls? Then get yourself a candidate who's got some sort of legitimacy and doesn't have a checkered past. And this may be in a way of a purge of the Democratic Party, not a purge of the left, which was that misleading idea, not a purge of identity politics. It's a purge of bad actors, if you will.
A new generation, Scott.
Yeah, it's a new generation. And the whole Mamdani campaign a year ago, outside of New York City, and I'd dare say even in New York City, few people had heard of Zohrah Mamdani. There was a really interesting campaign video that he put up this week where, he went out a few days after the election in 24, right? And he went out and he talked to New Yorkers on the street, and he was talking to people who voted for Trump, and they were talking to him why, right? And that the fact that we felt like we weren't being seen, we weren't being heard, Democrats weren't hearing us. He intercuts that with talking to people a year later, just before the election. And although we know it's a campaign ad, he's going to make himself look good, the energy is just completely different. You had an energy which was coming across a whole range, not just the young, a whole range of age groups. It was coming across a whole range of ethnic and minority groups that felt like we may have a future here. And again, I come back to this. The fact here is that a lot of people, is how did Trump kind of counter this? He tries to counter this not by his own positive vision of this is what I can do for New York. What does he do? He does two things. One is he calls Mamdani radical, a socialist, which apparently is a bad word, which is kind of a shocker to me, given the fact that socialism actually works in a number of countries I can talk about. A communist, of course, a Marxist. And I had a Trump person yesterday on a radio interview say he was a Maoist. So like Zoran was somehow carrying a little red book of Chairman Mao, right, along in the campaign. And it's like, okay, well, that's not exactly positive politics. And then what's the second thing Trump did? If you don't vote for Cuomo, and you vote for Mamdani, I'm going to cut your federal funding. I'm going to cut your funding that helps you out if you need food assistance. I'm going to cut your funding if you need healthcare assistance. I'm going to cut your funding if you need help with transport. Well, that's playing exactly into Mamdani's hands.
Yeah, it's also a very authoritarian threat.
Oh gosh, did we just say the word authoritarian with Trump?
Scott, we've got to move on because we've got to get through all of our stories. But currently, day 36 of the government shutdown, 670,000 federal employees furloughed, roughly 730,000 federal workers are working without pay. Republicans lost a few election seats on Tuesday, as you mentioned. Trump, of course, blamed the shutdown for this. He said that if you read the pollsters, the shutdown was a big factor. Negative for the Republicans. Last night, it was not expected to be a victory. It was a very Democrat areas. I don't think it was good for Republicans. I don't think it was good for anybody. We had an interesting evening and we learnt a lot. So Trump even suggested that Republicans kill the Senate filibuster and restore federal funding. So what's your reaction to this blame game?
Well, here's the first thing, Donald. If you're upset that the shutdown cost you those governor's elections or New York City, don't shut down the government. All right? And let's make this clear. What the Trump camp did is they effectively put not just Democrats, but in America in a position which is we're going to stop subsidies for health care. We're going to stop subsidies for the Affordable Care Act because Donald Trump has been trying to kill off what is colloquially known as Obamacare since 2017. So they put Democrats in the position of saying, you have to extend the funding for the government, keep it open while we gut Obamacare. That's what you have to do. And the Democrats called him out on it, right? So, Donald, this is not because of the shutdown that cost you these seats. It's because you wanted to gut health care and you tried to bully the Democrats on this, and now you're paying the price for it. So get back to this, which is, are you going to end the shutdown, which is now a record-setting shutdown? It's now past the 35-day record that Trump set back in 2019 when his ultimatum at that point to the Democrats was, you give me my wall with Mexico. Oh, newsflash, he didn't get that complete wall with Mexico, by the way. So just as I don't think he's going to be able to get away with gutting healthcare. So how many more weeks is he going to carry this on for? And the problem here is that politically there are some people who will not buy that explanation I've just given them. There will be some people who blame the Democrats. That's the nature of politics. But more Americans are blaming Trump and the Republicans than they are the Democrats for what's causing there. It's hurting the Republicans more than the Democrats.
And also because they're in power, Scott. But I want to get into this. You mentioned that Glenn Youngkin, the Virginia governor, had lost his role. He said that I firmly believe that the government shutdown was a very, very big challenge as we ran into this election. We have 330,000 government workers here that weren't getting paid. That is a real challenge heading into an election. Now, that's obviously a fair point. I don't believe that you can blame that for it, but it is a fair point going into an election that you have that many federal workers not being paid in your state. So Republicans will argue that the shutdown was used potentially as a tactic to get voters basically pissed off at the administration. But then the Democrats will argue that Congress can't even discuss the shutdown as Mike Johnson has them all on recess.
Yeah, let's go back. Glenn Youngkin, who's governor for a couple more months until he's replaced by Abigail Spanberger. He's playing a bit of politics here, which is, you've got government workers out there. But let's go beyond that. You've got people who just a couple of days for the election were losing their what's called SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. They were losing their food support. And about 40 million Americans are on food support, right? Because of the shutdown. You've got people who are facing transport delays. And just, as we speak, the Trump administration is telling airlines, you've got to cut 10% of your routes across America. And I come back to this. The Democrats all along in this said, look, if we have a clear path here to discuss, we'll talk about changes to Obamacare, we'll talk about the Affordable Care Act, but we're not going to allow the subsidies to be gutted. All right? That's where we go. That's been on the table ever since the Trump folks shut this thing down. And you put it absolutely correctly. How did the Trump people respond to this? Trump and his allies trashed Obamacare and said it's not acceptable. So they effectively showed they're not willing to negotiate. Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, for almost every day of this shutdown, has refused to do any business in the House of Representatives. And you can carry on with business in the House of Representatives even when the government shut down. We'll talk about the Epstein case in a minute and how Johnson's using it to deflect from that. So who is it that appears not to be willing to engage in negotiation and talks on this? Is it the Democrats or is it the Trump folks? And there's a couple other things that compound this. First of all, generally, when you have a shutdown, it's the people in power who are going to take the biggest hit because they're the guys who've got the power. They're the guys who have got the levers of government. And more broadly on this, it comes back to that authoritarian word. If the Trump camp was a camp that appeared like it would be willing to engage in consensus politics, cooperative politics, compromise politics, they get off the hook there. But they don't. They look like they are the my way or the highway people. And when they put out racist videos about the House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries and fake AI videos about the Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer, that doesn't exactly look to be responsible politics.
Well, you mentioned Mike Johnson and obviously the fact that he's shut Congress down. They're on recess. They can't go in and discuss any of this. But it's getting a bit insane now to be 36 days and still on this recess. They haven't resumed Congress. And this is what Thomas Massey has said. Now, he's obviously been going against fellow Republicans, going against Donald Trump and Mike Johnson for this. He tweeted that it's been over a month since Representative from Arizona won her election, but Speaker Johnson refuses to swear her in because she is the 218th final needed signature on my discharge petition to force a House vote on releasing the Epstein files. So, Scott, that was an argument from the very beginning, but is it becoming a more realistic answer and reason for this recess as time goes on?
There'll be a corrosive effect the longer this shutdown goes on if Johnson doesn't bring the House in. Now, I don't know how many more Republicans will break ranks. Thomas Massey has challenged the Trump camp on a number of issues. For example, he opposed the big not so beautiful bill that was passed earlier this year, and he criticized it in recent days. But he's got a fundamental point here, and that is that Johnson is clearly avoiding this vote, which would bring the Epstein case to the floor, because he will not allow Adelita Grijalva, the elected representative from Arizona to take up her seat. And not only will he not allow her to take up her seat, he actually lies about this. He lies about the fact that Grijalva can carry out business, she can talk to constituents, she can deal with their matters. She can't. She is barred from doing any business as a representative till she is sworn in. And Johnson knows that. So as usual, he looks like he's cleaning up after Donald Trump's mess. And Donald Trump's mess here is the Epstein files. Let's be very clear about it.
Scott, to interrupt, do you think that Trump, Mike Johnson, fellow other Republicans are buying time to be able to convince fellow Republicans to not sign the bill?
They're just trying to avoid the reckoning. I mean, the fact here is I don't think you're going to shift Thomas Massie and that handful of Republicans because I think, remember, this is not a motion that says, oh, this, says we have to do this regarding Epstein. We have to release the files. This is simply a motion which says you have to bring this matter to the floor. And so I don't think it looks like it just smells fishy. It smells fishy that they will not even allow a discussion on this. And again, there's an interesting juxtaposition here because we've had a development on the UK side of matters. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor now pursuing whatever new career he's pursuing. And this becomes headline news for several days. And so I honestly think that Johnson and the Trump camp it'll go away. It'll go away. And the reason why I think Trump may think that is, remember, Trump, more than 20 women with sexual abuse, harassment, or assault allegations against him. And the only one that's ever stuck, which was because of the defamation case that he lost, was E. Jean Carroll, right? The writer that he sexually assaulted in the 90s. So he's gotten away with it for so long, I can get away with it again. By the way, I think we have to just the caveat, there is no proof that we have so far that Donald Trump was involved in any of the pedophilia that Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of. There's no proof of that. But Trump is stonewalling this. He's stonewalling it through Bondi, the Attorney General. He's stonewalling it through Mike Johnson. And the problem here is twofold. If Johnson backtracks on this, not only does it mean that you give up ground on Epstein, but secondly, you look weak. Johnson has put his authority on the line to keep the House out of session. And once Johnson loses that or gives way, then there are more Republicans who think, you know what, maybe next time we can move quicker against Johnson if we don't like something he's doing.
Scott, let's move on to kind of the international space. Donald Trump, he ordered the Department of War to begin nuclear weapons testing a few weeks ago, the first time since 1992. Now, this obviously gets carried out by the Department of Energy, but the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, said earlier this week that the department isn't planning on nuclear explosions and upcoming work would be non-critical tests. So despite the Kremlin saying that they were testing nuclear submarines and that nuclear missile, they then kind of backtracked on that. But then Putin announced yesterday, he said, in this regard, I instruct the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the Special Services, and the corresponding civil agency to do everything possible to gather additional information on this matter, have it analysed by the Security Council, and submit coordinated proposals on the possible first steps of focusing on preparations for nuclear weapons tests. So another back and forth between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, but not so in words against each other, just both coming out in public and kind of throwing these spats out. So is this a war of words, or is it really empty threats when it comes to nuclear testing? Because just for the audience to understand, both the US and Russia have signed this comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, which basically means that both countries, they can't really do they can't do nuclear explosion testing, but now both countries, because Russia withdrew in 2023, basically they haven't ratified it. So they've signed it, but they haven't ratified it. So what's the situation here? Are they real threats, or do they have, or is it a war of words, or do they have free reign when it comes to nuclear testing?
Yeah, let's start off. There is a serious general issue here, which you've identified, which is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which, we come out of the Cold War. We're in the 1990s. We don't want to get back into a nuclear arms race again. And so you get this treaty, which is, agreed to by many nations. The United States never ratified it. Congress in the 1990s, again, because a lot of legislators don't want any type of oversight of America's nuclear program, they said we're not going to join. Now, Russia did join but they withdrew in 2023 using Trump as the excuse. Well, if he's not in the test ban treaty, we're not in it as well. And that's a serious general issue, because if the U.S. and Russia aren't going to make a commitment to stop nuclear testing, why should other nations who have nuclear weapons make that commitment as well? In practice, it has not been a serious issue because only one country since the 1990s has engaged in the testing of nuclear weapons, and that's North Korea. And I think they stopped in 2017. But the potential is there. In terms of the specific issue with Trump and Putin, it's when two besties fall out with each other, boy besties, I'm going to thump you. No, I'm going to thump you. No, I'm going to thump you even harder. So what happens here is that Putin is very worried that the U.S. might give Tomahawk cruise missiles, which are not nuclear, to Ukraine for strikes inside Russia. This goes back a month ago. So Putin's like, come on, Donald, don't give them the Tomahawks. We don't want you to do that, right? And Donald doesn't give the Tomahawks to Ukraine. But Putin is still worried about this. So what does he do? Putin comes out and goes, I've got me a big missile, and it's nuclear powered. It's called the Burevestnik, and it can fly a really long way. Oh, and I've got a nuclear powered naval drum, a super torpedo. Look at me. I've got this, right? Now, these are nuclear powered. They don't have nuclear warheads, but they're nuclear powered. Trump gets a garbled version of this and goes, Russia's resumed nuclear testing. China's resumed nuclear testing. We're going to do the same thing. Okay. So, not only is he factually wrong, but is he saying that the U.S. is going to test simply missiles that could carry nuclear warheads, right? Or is he saying that we're going to test nuclear warheads themselves? But here's the big thing, Maddie. The United States, because it has not carried out a nuclear test since the 1990s, it would take 36 months to set up a test of a nuclear warhead. It's not going to happen. It probably can't happen before Trump leaves office. But he's going to say to Vlad, look at me. Now, here's what's serious about this. So help me God, if the Russians, through the defense minister, Andrei Belousov, don't come out this week and go, we're making preparations. We're making preparations for the possibility of nuclear testings. Really, guys? You're going to do this again? You're going to threaten to swing again? And so, two guys threatening to duff each other up in the pub. The only thing that saves us right here is they're probably so drunk with wannabe power, they're going to miss with the swings with each other. I don't think this becomes a serious, immediate issue. What is one to watch is does this mean that Trump and Putin are going to continue to scrap? Because if they do, who's going to be the beneficiary of that? It will be Ukraine.
Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Thank you, Maddie.